Welcome to our webinar, Doing NRCS Conservation Activity Planning for Organic Farmers and Ranchers. Hello, my name is Jeff Shazinski, and I'm with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, NCAT, who is assisting in broadcasting this webinar. NCAT is one of 11 organizations who have joined with the Natural Resource Conservation Service in a 3-year National Conservation Innovation Project that is working to better integrate sustainable and organic agriculture production systems into NRCS programs and procedures. This is the second of a 4-part series of webinars on becoming a technical service provider, or TSP. The next webinar will be with Harriet Bihar of Moses in January of 2013 with a virtual tour of Organic Farm Conservation Activity Planning. Finally, Joanne Baumgartner with the Wild Farm Alliance will lead a final webinar on how NRCS TSPs can support biodiversity conservation in organic systems in March of 2013. We will have these again posted with the exact dates at the end of the webinar, so don't worry if you missed that. Copies of all the trainings will be available on our ATRA National Sustainable Agriculture Information website, www.atra.ncat.org. And you can always email or phone the presenters today, as well as contact our 1-800 hotline at the ATRA project. The phone numbers, email, and websites will be posted later on at the end of the webinar. As we proceed, we really encourage you to type in your questions that is available to you on the chat part of your screen there. We will have a Q&A session after the presentations where we hope to answer as many of those questions as possible. Also, at the end of the webinar, there will be a very short evaluation that will pop up. Please make these webinars better by providing your feedback on this very short evaluation. The 11 organizations who are joining with NRCS and NCAT in this effort are the Center for Rural Affairs, the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Service, or MOSES, Organic Farming Research Foundation, the Virginia Association for Biological Farming, the Florida Organic Growers, the Kansas Rural Center, the Wild Farm Alliance, and the Land Stewardship Project, and the Practical Farmers of Iowa. Today's presenter is Katy Green, who is perhaps the most experienced TSP working with NRCS and organic producers in the United States. She will share her efforts at developing conservation activity plans in compliance with NRCS standards, known in NRCS lingo as a Conservation Activity Plan 138 or CAP 138. Katy is the Organic Transitions Coordinator for the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, or MOFGA, which is the largest and oldest organic organization in the country. Katy will share examples from a couple different conservation activity plans she's developed for organic farms in Maine, as well as share her experiences as a technical service provider for NRCS, in addition to the required elements of the CAP 138. Finally, joining us today, hopefully will be, to answer some questions if needed, will be Dana Larson, a member of the National NRCS TSP team who certifies TSP in the western region of the United States and is based in Washington, D.C. So let's begin, Katy.
Thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff just says, I'm Katy Green, and I'm the Organic Transitions Coordinator for MOFGA. And we can go on to the next slide. The next 2 slides will just kind of quickly give you a little bit of information about the organization that I work for, because that plays a pretty big role in the way I write these activity plans. So MOFGA is a nonprofit that our goal is to help farmers and gardeners grow organically. And then we also have MOFGA certification services on the next slide, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of MOFGA. It is the primary USDA accredited certifying agency for the state of Maine. So we work very closely with each other, but MOFGA certification services staff cannot give advice, and MOFGA staff do. And that comes into play a little bit later in the presentation, but I just wanted to give you that background. So now I'll kind of jump into how I approach the CAP 138. On this slide, I kind of give you an idea of the knowledge that's required to do this type of planning. Number one is pretty extensive knowledge of the National Organic Program and organic standards, and then familiarity with NRCS systems and practices. The Electronic Field Office Technical Guide is a major component and resource, so it's really important to have familiarity with that. The Web Soil Survey, depending on what state you're in, there may be more or less emphasis on endangered species, and the Russell II erosion calculation is also important. So the necessary pieces of the plan, you can find information on them using the Electronic Field Office Technical Guide. So in Section 3, you'll see the Conservation Plan Supporting Organic Transition. And if you click on that folder, it gives you the checklist, the criteria, and a couple of templates. The criteria, this is just a screenshot of the first page of the criteria. But the criteria is pretty specific, and it lets you know everything that needs to be included or considered when planning. We can go on to the next slide. And when I first looked at the criteria, I noticed that it followed the organic system plan pretty closely, which is why I set up this timeline the way I did. But essentially, when you become a TSP, this gives you an idea of the timeline or the process that I use in my planning, which is once the client signs a contract with NRCS, they notify you. And there can be some confusion because there's an application process with NRCS and then an actual contract. And I have heard from people who have filled out an application and think they have a contract. And it's important to make that distinction with people when you're first getting to know them, because you can't do any planning prior to a contract being in place. Otherwise, it creates some issues from the NRCS standpoint. So, just make sure that people have a contract in place. And then the first thing I do is schedule a site visit. Since I'm in Maine, site visits are all scheduled for the growing season, which is primarily May through October. So I schedule, I'll do all of my visits in the spring, and then I write my plans in the winter. And then there's often a second visit where you meet with the client again to go over the completed plan and make sure you agree on everything that's sort of written in there. And then once you and the client both sign off on the plan, it can go to their local NRCS county office, and you can invoice them. And I'll say that the entire timeline can be highly variable, and other people in other parts of the country might not have as strict sort of parameters as I need to have. But it's also worth noting that you generally only have a year from when the contract is signed to complete the plan. And so if it takes a couple months to contact you, that can kind of set you behind. So another thing that's worth doing is asking when their contract is signed so you have an idea of your timeline. If you can't get it done within a year, you can work out some things with NRCS, but it does create another complicating factor. So the criteria, once again, I noticed that the necessary pieces very closely followed that's required in an organic system plan once these people become certified. So I actually use an OSP as a template during my farm visit so that I can make sure I cover all of the required elements. And it also allows me to give the client more familiarity with what the paperwork might be when they become certified. So if you don't work very closely with a certifier, you may not have an OSP at your disposal, but you can download ours at that website on the screen. And ATRA also has a good example OSP that you could use during your visit. So the actual plan on the next slide, the actual plan that I complete has the paperwork that's required for the organic system plan filled out, as the person would once they become certified. Summary and recommendations for transition. So the summary and recommendations include, in my case, both conservation considerations and also just sort of practical things that will come into play in transition. So this is more of a whole farm approach, not just a conservation-minded approach. So, my summary and recommendations might cover the seed search or record-keeping requirements for organic certification. And then the next really big and important piece of the plan is NRCS practices that you would recommend the producer implement prior, to help them through their transition. So you want to think about what will help the farm to meet their goals, what will ameliorate some of the resource concerns that you might have identified during your farm visit, and then include a map of where recommended practices will be located on the farm. There's also, you'll need to include an assessment of natural resource concerns and a soil resource report that you can generate using Web Soil Survey. And then you may need to, depending on your state, include endangered and threatened species worksheets and possibly a cultural resources worksheet. And then I think everybody will have to do the Russell II erosion calculation. So the final product that I usually write is between 75 and 100 pages, and it takes about a week of time to complete. And the week of time does include the initial farm visit, site visit. But this length and amount of work is not necessarily required. NRCS does provide templates that you can use that are much shorter and much more focused on conservation practices. I go through that extra step primarily because, my job at MOFGA would ask me to go through that step anyway, so I streamline and put the whole thing together. The next slide just gives you an idea of the first page of the Cropland template that is provided by NRCS, and it's pretty straightforward and easy to fill out if that's the route you choose to go. So we'll hop into an example here. This will be just sort of a basic mixed vegetable farm, smaller scale, maybe between 5 and 10 acres. So the first step that I would do is get the OSP paperwork. Next slide. From MOFGA Certification Services. And our application covers the basic information for the farm and is actually, looks pretty similar to the first page of that NRCS template that was just on the screen. It has, names, acreages, crops grown, just sort of the basics. The organic farm plan gets into actual farming methods, crop rotation inputs, potential sources of contamination, record keeping, that sort of thing. So that's where things get a little more in-depth and might not be necessarily where you need to go for your NRCS planning. I mean, you'll have to cover those things, but you might not need to include all of that in your final plan. But you'll have to gather that information during your visit. So this slide just gives you an idea of, the first page of the farm plan and how things start. So I would, have these questions with me and go through all of them during the visit. Next slide. So in addition to going over the OSP paperwork during the visit, there are other pieces of information that are important to gather. First would be figuring out the farm goals. So I often like to ask what the landowner envisions the farm looking like in 5 or 10 years and kind of thinking about things that needed to be tweaked or changed or how things can be tweaked or changed to help them meet their goals. You'll have to determine the slope in various fields and look for signs of erosion and that sort of thing. I recommend taking pictures, particularly if there's going to be a lag in between when you visit and when you write the plan, like there often is in my case. The pictures can help remind you what you meant in your notes. I also like to ask the landowner about invasive or noxious species that I may not immediately see, but that they might know exist on their property and are creating problems for them. And then I like to sort of discuss and determine if there are NRCS practices that the landowner is interested in implementing, prior to my visit and beyond those that I might have thought of recommending. So the summary and recommendations piece of the plan includes the farm goals, and NRCS does ask in their checklist if you have helped the farm to meet their goals. So it's important to be able to really clearly articulate what those are and lay out a path to meet them. You'll also need to include the timetable for transition or certification. I think NRCS actually asks for the date when the person could become certified, but this can often be a moving target, particularly if you're talking about livestock operations or split operations. So sometimes there will be an actual date and sometimes there won't, but it's important to just sort of outline the parameters there. And then what are the barriers to this farm being certified, right away? Identify where problems exist in the OSP as things stand. And, that's often, improvements needed in record keeping, or maybe there's not a clear crop rotation strategy, that type of thing. And I would outline those for the client in the summary and recommendations piece. And then the next piece gets into natural resource concerns. So I didn't intend for anybody to actually read this entire slide, but it was just to give you an idea of how I approach noting the natural resource concerns. So NRCS asks you to look at air quality, domestic animals, fish and wildlife, plant condition, soil erosion, and water quality and quantity. And so, if things are fine and don't need further discussion, you can easily just put a check mark, and then oftentimes there's at least a few things that need further discussion, and that piece of the plan is where you can note what you saw and helps build a case for why you recommended certain practices. And then the next piece gets into the actual NRCS practices that you would recommend the landowner implement. So this would be practices that would help the landowner to meet their farm goals or aid in their transition, or that help the producer to meet the quality criteria kind of identified on the last page. So for each practice that you recommend, you'll have to include the specifications and standards from the Electronic Field Office Technical Guide, and you find those in Section 4 under the Conservation Practices folder. And that screenshot on the right gives you a glimpse of where that is. It's helpful if the way that you recommend things mimic the NRCS Record of Decisions. And then you'll need to include appropriate information for the implementation requirements and detail how the practices that you recommend should be used in organic systems. And two prime examples of when you really need to pay attention to that, in my mind, are when you recommend a practice like cover crop. If somebody is transitioning to organic production, the seeds in the cover crop practice will need to be certified organic. And the other place I see it a lot is when recommending fence and pasture, and you'll need to let people know not to use pressure-treated wood. So those are things that might not be on the NRCS staff person's mind in the county office, so it's important for you to include special parameters for organic producers in that area. The next slide just kind of gives you an idea of the length and the type of stuff that I write in the recommended practices. Again, this is not something I expect you to sit and read all the way through, but just to give you an idea that you're not writing a full essay for each recommended practices. It's just a brief kind of blurb about why the practice is recommended, how it'll help the producer meet their goals, and what are the special circumstances for organic producers. And then you'll also have to include a map that shows where all the recommended practices should be implemented on the property. So keep that in mind as well. These are some commonly recommended practices that I pretty consistently see over and over again. For crops, it's cover crop, conservation crop rotation, mulching, irrigation systems, integrated pest management, and upland wildlife habitat management. And then for livestock, it's nutrient management, fence, watering facilities, prescribed grazing, forage and biomass planting, and animal trails and walkways. And it's important if you are recommending a whole suite of practices that you think about reasonable timelines for practices to be implemented. So if you're recommending that somebody implements 7 different practices, it might not be reasonable to think that they're all going to do it the next growing season. So the recommended date is something that I often put in there, and I try to stagger things so that people can clearly reach their goals when they want to, but that a ton of activity doesn't have to happen in 1 year if not necessary. So the other important piece when you're recommending practices is to check for updates. The Field Office Technical Guide does get updated pretty consistently, pretty regularly, and the specifications change. So check for updates, and then I would also encourage you to provide your feedback on how the documents can better suit organic farmers. The state office, it often says at the bottom of the specifications who to contact if you have recommendations. So the next piece of the plan is the soil resource report, which is pretty straightforward. You can access it through the Web Soil Survey. And basically what you do is you just determine the area of interest based on boundary lines or boundary lines of transitioning fields or of the farm. And then once you have that, you just check out, and you're not purchasing anything. It's a free service, but that's the button that they use, and print it. And that gives you the soil resource report that you need. And the information here is needed for you to complete the Russell 2. So this it's easier to do this piece first than trying to do the erosion calculation. Other forms that may be necessary in your state, but also may not be, would be a cultural resources checklist and endangered species. So in Maine, we do have to fill out endangered species worksheets and the WEP, which is the Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Procedure forms. That may not be the case in every state, but if you do have to do these, it's they're pretty easy checklists, and you get maps of the endangered and threatened species in the area of the farm you're working with from the NRCS office or from the landowner. And from there you can determine if anything that you've recommended is going to either positively or negatively impact those species, and then NRCS can look further into the potential implications. So the next slide just gives you an idea of what the maps might look like. And one of these, they're kind of hard to read, but one of these is a state map and one of these is a federal map. And so you can see that in both of these cases, this property has endangered and threatened species known to be in the area. So it's just an extra thing that you may have to keep in mind in your state when doing your planning and thinking about the impact on those species. The next piece is the Russell 2, which can't emphasize enough that if you haven't used this program, you might want to ask for training before diving in. And I guess you can get training through the Great Lakes Conservation Professional Program and maybe some other organizations. I actually received my training from my NRCS state office. Somebody there was kind enough to take an afternoon and sit down with me and go over the whole process, which made it much more helpful. And then for the first handful of plans I wrote, I think I called her for every Russell that I did, because it just wasn't entirely easy to get used to. So I'll just throw that out there. How this works is you, as the TSP, put in the soil type that you've gathered from the web soil survey, the slope that you gathered from your farm visit, and the management practices. And then the program does the calculation and gives you the predicted erosion values. And the program, I don't think, is compatible with Max. At least it wasn't when I first started doing my planning, so I actually have to go to the library to complete it. But maybe that will change sometime soon. And then kind of the final piece of the plan is the cover sheet, which you wouldn't think would be too much, but it does have to have the TSP certification statement that your local state contact can get to you. And then it also has to have spaces for signatures for you as the TSP, the landowner that you're working with, and the NRCS official in their office who will help them, who's their primary contact. So how this works is often during the second visit is I'll meet with the landowner and we'll both sign off on it, and then I send it to NRCS for them to sign off on it. So once everybody has signed off on the plan and everything looks fine, the payment process is initiated. And this slide gives you an idea of the payment rates for 2013. It is worth noting that when you first become a TSP, you do have to write a practice plan that NRCS reviews prior to you officially becoming a TSP. So there is kind of one plan that you have to go through the process of writing that you don't receive payment for. I guess it can be an example. It doesn't have to be based on a real farm scenario, but it's worth keeping that in mind. The payment is where the relationship that I kind of outlined earlier between MOFGA and MOFGA certification services really plays a role, because we bill less than the NRCS payment rates. And that's primarily so that the farm has money left over to implement some of the recommended practices or to apply towards their certification fees. But you can, as a TSP, you can bill higher or lower or exactly that amount. But so that's how that works for us. There's also the possibility that you can do an assignment of payment, which is where you arrange with the landowner and NRCS for you as the TSP to receive the payment directly. If you don't do the assignment of payment, the landowner is automatically paid by NRCS, and all of the payments are direct deposits to a bank account. So you can get this assignment of payment where the entire payment or a portion of it is directly deposited into your bank account, and then the remainder would go to the landowner. It's just a simple one-page form that you saw on the screen there. So that's kind of all of the required elements of a standard mixed vegetable kind of farm planning scenario. For livestock, it's all of those required elements that I just went over, but it's often a little bit more complicated, and that's because the transition dates are often times more of a moving target, and the pasture rule, so if you're working with somebody with ruminants, thinking about the pasture rule in your conservation planning adds a complicating element. NRCS does provide a checklist that you can use to make sure your plan contains the required elements. So it's found in Section 3 of the Field Office Technical Guide, and it's a pretty standard checklist. The next slide gives you a picture, an idea of it. So I often print out the checklist when I start writing the plan, and just sort of, as I include things in the plan, check it off so that I know that it has all of the required elements before I send it to NRCS. There is an element of quality assurance by NRCS after you become a TSP. So Dana may be able to speak to this after we're done if I'm wrong, but I think that they need to check 10% of the plans. So whoever your contact is in the state office will randomly select 10% of your plans, and they actually go and visit the farms and walk around and make sure what you've written is accurate and that sort of thing. And the first time that this happened, I didn't realize it was going to happen, and it kind of caught me off guard. But it's actually the second time that my state contacted, I actually went along and I learned some things about what he was thinking and looking for. So that can be a useful tool to help you figure out what they want to see in your planning as well. And I will say that both that visit by the state person, the quality assurance visit, and my initial visit for planning are both sort of like more relaxed versions of organic inspections. So for those of you who might be inspectors for a certifying agency, you're walking around the farm in much the same manner. You're asking a lot of the same questions, and it's just more relaxed because it's not an inspection. So who signs up for farms? The program is voluntary, so I like to include that so that, in thinking about this, you really get people that want to be working with you and are generally excited about the program, so that's nice. And more often than not, I find that I'm working with beginning farmers, which is great. And then the three pictures sort of, when I was going back and looking at the plans I had written, they seem to be dominated by small livestock producers, wild blueberries, and mixed vegetables. So I'm not sure how that might be helpful to you or play out in your state. I suspect wild blueberries won't dominate many other states, but that it gives you just an idea of the types of people I'm working with. It's not maple syrup people or large livestock people for the most part, for whatever reason. So finally, I just wanted to include this about keeping yourself busy. And I will say that I started writing these plans a few years ago, and right away some county offices totally took on to the idea and were signing people up. And still, this year, which is three years later, there are some county offices that I've still only gotten 1 or 2 plans out of. So I think that it might take some time to cultivate relationships with NRCS staff and let them know that you're available and ready to start writing plans. Otherwise, they might think there's nobody around. And if you stay in touch and remind them that you're around, you might get a lot more plans coming from a particular county office. We were also able to offer training about the activity plan and organic standards, and the pictures that are on this slide are actually an example of one of those trainings where the gentleman in the pink shirt is actually an NRCS county employee who took us on a farm tour with a farm that had implemented a lot of NRCS practices. And so we got good turnout, and people got excited about the plans and about NRCS practices. he got a few new clients out of the evening, and people became more familiar with NRCS. So if you're able to organize those types of opportunities, it could generate a lot of business for you. I think I got like 5 plans out of that one day. And then encouraging people that you're speaking with to engage with NRCS is really important. And I will say, you know, as a nonprofit, this has been a pretty, you know, not an important source of income, because we are subsidizing a portion of the work that I do with our membership fees, but it is a source of income, which is nice. And I think that is just about it. I will say that even though I've been a TSP for a few years, even just in doing this webinar process, I learned some things. So the NRCS systems are always changing and not always intuitive, but it is worthwhile if you can, you know, get through everything, and feel free to ask questions. So that is all I have. I left ample time for Q&A, so hopefully.
Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome.
That was great. That was really great. Thanks a lot. We do have a number of questions, so I'll
okay.
beginning. First off, can a Canadian do this? To your knowledge, maybe you don't know, and I don't know if we'll try to see if Dana is on or not and could answer that. I'm pretty sure I think you can't, but I was actually talking to Margaret Scholes
Can you hear me now?
a week ago or so, and she actually suggested that with work permits and things, perhaps, but I don't know. What do you think, Katie?
I have no idea.
So I'm sorry for the Canadian that joined us, but I think it might be worth looking into. What? Oh, Dana's on the line. Thank you, Dana.
Can you hear me?
Dana, could you answer that?
Yeah. Can you hear me at all? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
It's the producer that needs to be eligible for the EQIP program. That is probably the first step. But if a Canadian a business wants to do some work with an American producer that's eligible for EQIP, and they have the business licenses to work in the United States, then yeah, they can be a TSP.
Oh, okay. We stand corrected. Thank you, Dana. Can a non-TSP certified farmer, so they're not certified to be a TSP, submit their own plans as part of an EQIP contract? In other words, can they do their own plan even if they're not certified?
Are you mean a certified TSP or certified?
No, a non-certified TSP. The farmer just basically wants to do their own conservation activity plan, and they're not certified as of their own farm. In other words, they got an EQIP contract, and they want to do conservation activity planning. Can they do their own conservation activity plan on their own farm, even though they're not certified as a TSP?
No, they can't. Only certified TSPs can do it. So even if it's your own farm, you have to be a certified TSP. Now, a farmer can write his own conservation plan, but it can't be under the EQIP and get paid for it. He can just write the plan to write the plan.
Okay, thank you. Is the Russell II attachment always needed for every CAP 138, or only in the cases where it appears that there is a natural resource concerned with erosion?
Maybe Dana can speak to this better than I can, but my understanding is that it has to be in every plan, and the Russell calculation gives you kind of the threshold value and then estimates where the soil loss value is. And so if it's below, there's no real other concern for you as a planner to have, but if the Russell suggests it's above, it kind of triggers me to go back and think about some of the recommended practices and what I saw in practice at the farm.
I agree with that, Katie, for the cropland part. But if you happen to be working with a farmer or a rancher that's working with a transitioning operation that's grazing, and they're not dealing with any kind of cropland, then Russell may not be applicable. So the best bet is to read the plan development criteria, and it gives you the list of things that are required in the plan. And there's actually 2 templates, one for cropland and one for grazing land.
Yeah, and this is a somewhat related question. What if the erosion issue is more a wind erosion issue rather than kind of water-based or or slope-based? Is there a different thing other than Russell 2 to use, or can Russell 2 work in cases of wind erosion?
You're going to want to use any tool that's going to help you analyze the resource concerns there. So yeah, you'd be using the WEQ equation in cases where that's going to be the best tool to help in your analysis.
You're fading at least a bit to me, Dana. If you could repeat that.
TSP is going to want to use the resource assessment tool that's most likely to give him and the producer the answers he needs. So it would be feasible he would use a wind erosion equation in those areas that it would be most applicable in.
Katie, this is directly for you. Have you done any of these TSP caps for large farms, and they're saying here greater than 100 acres?
Only I think 2 out of the probably 50 or more. So not very many.
Okay. Does NRCS recognize? I think this has to do, Katie. You might be, your interest in the organic system plan. There's a question asked: does NRCS recognize other labeling systems like Salmon Safe or Food Alliance labels, or, in other words, I guess the process for becoming like Food Alliance certified as a sustainable farm? Would that also work potentially as a kind of template, I guess, for a CAP 138, or do you think this is pretty unique to organic?
I'm not. It's hard for me to say because I'm not familiar with those templates, and it's entirely possible that there are other templates that would work. I just, I work for an organic organization, and so when I was first approached and asked to be a TSP and I was looking at the criteria, I thought, well, the questions they're looking for pretty much mimic almost exactly the organic system plan, so it makes sense for me to use that as a template, and that's paperwork that I'm very familiar with. And I will also say that the organic system plan is a great tool as a template for me, because I pretty much give people what they can then turn around and use to get certified, and it helps MOFGA certification services get more complete applications from new applicants, and it helps the producer to understand how questions are answered on that paperwork. I think people feel like the certification paperwork can be overwhelming if you've never been certified before. So I like to use this planning process as a way to overcome that barrier and address the natural resources concerns and kind of take into account everything happening at the farm. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Dana, what do you think? I mean, have you, just a comment perhaps, Dana?
Well, the templates that are associated with the CAP, we really highly recommend you use them. In fact, I think the CAP plan development criteria says those templates should be used. And it just keeps things straight so that for one thing, the CAP payment rates to the landowner are based on natural resource concerns. They're not intended to be the entire organic system plan. So it keeps it straight, and that's what the landowners reimburse for, is that particular part, and the template outlines that.
Here's another one, and maybe this has happened to you, Katie, since you've done so many, is that you've done the CAP 138, they've signed off, you've been paid, and then down the road a piece, they want to do some major changes in that plan. Is that a new contract? Can you be rehired again to like rewrite the plan? Has this ever happened?
I've never had that happen, and I'm not sure that they could get a new contract for the same type of service.
To
I'm sure
rewrite
Dana
a plan,
knows.
for instance, or something.
Yeah.
Dana?
Dana?
Well, that's a good question. The plan technically is good as a practice. The CAP plan is a lifespan of 1 year because it's a plan, but within the plan itself, it may encompass quite a long stretch of time according to implementation. So we've always encouraged plans to be as flexible as possible. Now, when you're scheduling something, you're making a recommendation for scheduling, so you really shouldn't need a brand new plan unless something really drastic has changed, like you've added more land to the operation, or you've got an extremely different set of objectives. But that's a good one to talk to your local NRCS about.
Here's an interesting one, Katie. Maybe you've had this. This is a woman who started to begin this process and work with farmers, and she's encountered two producers that really have no idea on what they want to do with their farm, or only have a small portion of their farm that they plan to. I guess they might be doing like a split operation where they're transitioning part of their farm into organics. And she just says, anyone else run into this kind of problem where they're really not sure what they want, I guess?
Yeah, unfortunately, I have gotten that a couple of times, and it does make the planning process pretty difficult. And I guess that's a case where I would at least focus on sort of like the bare bones minimum that you generally have an idea if people are going to be focused on livestock or crops, for example. So even if they have cropland and they're not really sure what they're going to do, what their rotation might be like, what scale they want to be at, you can still discuss things like the crop rotation requirements in the National Organic Program, and how cover crop and conservation crop rotation as NRCS practices can, build soil health and be tools for weed reduction and that sort of thing when they kind of get their crop operation going and have a better idea. But it can be difficult to work with people who don't have a super clear picture of what they want to do.
Here's another one. It's do you know of any other organic organizations? They mentioned NOFA, New York. We have one here in Montana, Montana Organic Association, which I know does not do what you do. In other words, they provide this kind of TSP service along with their organization, like Oregon Tilth, perhaps. I don't know. Do you know of any that other organizations doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I think that Wendy Sue Harper at NOFA Vermont, and I'm not sure if she's still at NOFA Vermont, but I think they had that set up there. I think that Carolina Farm Stewardship in North and South Carolina is exploring this sort of thing as a possibility. So those are two that jump to mind. I'm not sure that there's a lot of organic organizations in the country with this sort of setup, but as I said, it is a potential source of revenue and possibly worth exploring.
Yeah, I know that NCAT also is pursuing this as well. And we potentially could do that on on a national basis, although we haven't really fully committed to that yet. I'll just put that in there. What if this is probably really practical, but probably, and having done 50, what if a farmer received payment, you got it all approved, but then he somehow withholds payment to you? Is there any recourse?
I guess there could be.
So you've never had to get any?
We have had that happen twice, actually, where people have gotten their money from NRCS else and haven't paid us. So you can get around that by doing the assignment of payment, where you, as the TSP, receive the payment directly, or you can take a chance, try invoicing again.
This is an interesting one, and I guess it's directed towards Dana. Many growers require technical assistance after the first year, which can be very, because they have a steep learning curve in organics. And could NRCS consider extending a TSP contract? Now, I guess this could be about a TSP contract for a CAP planning or for other technical assistance, but is there a way for that to go beyond a single year?
The relationship between the TSP and the producer is strictly a private business arrangement. So it's whatever the producer and land and TSP are willing to work out. Because the contract is between NRCS and the producer, not NRCS and the TSP. The landowner is going to get when the CAP plan is completed, he's going to get a payment. And if there's follow-up that's required, then that'll be something that the landowner TSP would work out.
Katie, somebody wants to know what was your level of, what was your background before coming to MOFGA, and then what was the level of confidence when you met your first client?
Well, my degree is focused on soil and water science, soil science. So before I worked at MOFGA, I worked in cooperative extension, working on water quality projects, on-farm water quality projects. So that gave me a great deal of familiarity with NRCS practices. I'm also on the state technical committee here in Maine, so I kind of have a pretty good understanding of the programs and how they're implemented in the state, and that's pretty helpful when you're first getting started. And how confident was I? I guess moderately confident. I had been, my job is as transitions coordinator, so I'm pretty, quite familiar with the organic rule. And prior to being in this position, I did do organic inspections, so I have a good idea about what inspectors are looking at and how to kind of look at things while you're on a farm visit. So that's actually the piece that had the least amount of learning curve, kind of getting through and understanding the NRCS processes and that sort of thing is actually the harder part, I would say, for sure, than the farm visit and getting the information you need.
And I have two more. First one is just how do you get business? Does the farmer tend, who's got an EQIP contract, tend to contact you off the list, I know, which is posted on the NRCS website, or does NRCS call you, or how do you get business, I guess is
right. And so there is, after you become a TSP, you're kind of added to the list on TechReg, and so when people sign their contracts with NRCS, the person in the county tells them to go find the TSP from that list that they want to work with. Since I've been the only person or the primary person in Maine writing these, the county offices are, for the most part, just giving the clients who have the contracts for the CAP my information so that they know they need to contact me. But it is the client that contacts me. Occasionally, since I've developed some pretty good relationships with a couple county offices, the person in the county office will call and check in and ask how many people I'm working with in that county to try to gauge if I've heard from everyone that they have contracts with, so that they can then follow up with clients. And that does, it does happen to me pretty consistently that the client signs the contract with NRCS for the CAP 138, but during that process they may sign 2 or 3 other contracts, or they may have a lot going on, or they may have never participated in NRCS programs before and they're just a little overwhelmed and they don't realize they have to contact me. So there can be a couple months lag. But in a perfect world, the client would always contact you, the day after they sign the contract.
They just keep coming in. The guys that want to quit. So, do you have the Russell tool downloaded onto your computer? Is that doable? Can you actually have that tool actually on your computer?
Yeah. So if you have a PC, you can, and if you Mac, you can't.
Okay. Yes, actually, Harriet in the last one described that, and we did get questions about software that might be able to convert, and we don't seem to know actually if that's true. As far as we know right now, it's pretty sure they're not.
Yeah, if anybody finds out if that's possible, please let me know.
People do like their Macs, I guess. This is one, it's probably a bit beyond, and maybe Dana can get into this because it's not exactly, strictly speaking, about a CAP, and I've heard this question from farmers calling NCAT NATRA. Farmers with crop rotations, they have a plan of what they want to do with their crop rotation and how they want to do it, but it's kind of important sometimes to change, given weather and other circumstances, the rotation that you will do. And if you're getting resources, for instance, for implementing a crop rotation practice, how flexible is it? Are you kind of, if you sign and get resources to develop a crop rotation, are you kind of stuck with the one you say you're going to do, or is this somewhat of an adaptable thing? And I think maybe Dana might know more as well as you, Katie, but what's your thought on that?
Let's see, this is Dana. Like I said before, the plans ought to be somewhat flexible, but in the CAP, you've basically taken the farmer to a point where he's made a decision. Now, if something comes up, usually an NRCS planner would work to help the landowner modify the plan. So again, if any additional work that requires modification, generally you don't get any more money for. The landowner won't get any more money for. But hopefully the plan has been, talked about enough with alternative systems discussed that the flexibility will be built in there. Does that answer the question?
Sounds good. What do you think, Katie? Do you have any comment? Or?
Yeah, I would agree with Dana. I think this is a situation where kind of what I had on the last slide, where cultivating a good relationship with your local office can really help you, so that if stuff does come up, you can come up with a solution working with NRCS.
Well, here's one that's to my heart, because I follow farm policy a lot. Somebody says, without the Farm Bill finalization, can NRCS act on any new 138 planning activities? Dana?
Say that question again.
Okay, without the Farm Bill finalization, we're in the process potentially of having a new Farm Bill. Will this impact, I guess, the CAP 138 program? is there going to be continuing availability of funds to do this work without a new farm bill?
The authority for the EQIP program has been, it's extended, and I think we're okay with that for a while yet. So you'll have to ask me again, I believe the next March, but the EQIP authority's been, is still intact even without the farm bill, the new farm bill now.
That's my understanding too, Dana. So. Well, here's just a comment for somebody who has been working, Rex, who works in our office and is maybe hopefully becoming a TSP for organic farmers, says that using the Mozilla browser can be weird, I guess, with interacting with the NRCS educational, what was that tool? Anyway, you know what the Ag Learn program is that, do you know if that's true, Katie or Dana, that you should use the Microsoft Explorer rather than Mozilla as a browser?
Yeah, that's been recommended. If anybody has any trouble at all with the Ag Learn process, then they should contact their resident state TSP coordinator, and they can get somebody to help them through that.
Oh boy, they just keep coming in. I have to. I'll get one last question. We're coming up on the hour here. Does Moses, that's the organization, you're familiar with it, Katie, much like your own in the Midwest. You might not know this, and I don't think I do too, but they have a mentorship program for beginning and organic farmers, and they were just wondering if a farm organic plan, I guess that they do for that, follows or qualifies for the CAP. That's kind of a hard question for you, not knowing Moses, but my gut feeling, actually, from knowing Harriet, is probably not. I think you would still need to go through the more formal NRCS, although I'm sure doing that planning activity would certainly make it perhaps easier to work with the TSP to develop it one. What do you think?
Yeah, I have a hard time. It's possible that the planning that they do would help, but I have a hard time imagining that any plan that's not required by NRCS would have all of the elements that NRCS wants to see in this plan. So I'm sure there would be at least a couple things that would need to be added.
Oh, okay. Finally, and Dana, I know, and we can do this, and you can actually watch the first webinar with Harriet about this. Somebody wanted to know where the location, or how do you get in contact with this Great Lakes training for the Russell II. How do you access that? I assume that's probably on the NRCS website somehow. I believe, Harriet, in the previous webinar, which is on our, by the way, all of these are posted on our website, and this one will be, so if you want to look at it all over again, probably by later this afternoon, certainly by tomorrow morning, you can get it off our website. And the first one with Harriet, I think, had the link to the website where the Great Lakes training thing was, because she actually did that. But Dana, is that on the website as far as you know, to get the Russell II training?
If you go to do a Google search for technical service provider, you'll go to our TSP website, and under the TSP resources training, there's a list of resources there that TSPs can get training from, and the Great Lakes should have a link right there. Otherwise, just put a search in your search engine, Great Lakes Conservation Professional Training Program, and it should pop right up.
Okay, good. And well, that concludes today, and I want to thank both Dana and Katie for a great job. Again, this will be posted on the website. We've been leaving the names and addresses and emails. You can contact Katie by email. Remember that our next webinars are kind of coming up after the first of the year, so there won't be ones for a while. We had these two in November, but in January we're going to start up again, and then March we're going to have two more in this set, and ultimately we'll actually have these as what they call a playlist. So someday, if you just want to do a TSP of our things, we'll have those as one unit. So and those will be coming up. And remember, immediately after this, an evaluation will pop up, and appreciate everyone giving some feedback on this. And thanks again, everyone.